Garland, Texas, wasn't the sort of town that showed up on postcards. It sat quietly off the main highway, far enough from Dallas that city noise faded into wind and prairie grass, but close enough that folks still argued about Cowboys games over pie and bad diner coffee. Life moved slow here, on purpose, and that's exactly how Raymond Ray Whitmore liked it. Ray lived on the edge of Garland, in a weather-worn farmhouse, surrounded by rusted fences and hayfields more golden than green. At 68, he didn't farm anymore. Not really. The old tractor barely ran, and the only animals left were a pair of stubborn goats that had refused to die of old age. Most days, Ray spent his time puttering in the barn, tinkering with old equipment and fixing things nobody cared about anymore, like rotary tillers and VHS players. He liked machines that didn't talk back, machines that broke for honest reasons. His neighbors knew him as the quiet old man who showed up to town council meetings twice a year and bought black coffee from the diner without cream or conversation. What they didn't know, or had forgotten, was that Ray once held a top-secret security clearance and designed advanced propulsion systems for the U.S. military. That was another life, sealed in a locked drawer along with the faded photograph of his wife and daughter, both taken by a drunk driver on a rainy Wednesday 26 years ago. Since then, Ray had disappeared into the rhythms of a quieter world: wrenches, gears, grease, and silence. About 4 miles into town, there sat a place that broke Garland's otherwise sleepy routine: Jensen's Garage. The building looked like it had once been a feed store, with its red tin roof and big barn doors, but now it was the only auto repair shop in 3 counties that could fix both a carburetor and a modern hybrid battery. Carla Jensen, 36, owned the place. She had inherited it from her father, a Vietnam vet with a temper like a hot engine and a heart big enough to teach his daughter every trick he knew. Carla had grown up with socket wrenches in her pockets and engine grease under her nails. She ran her garage like a tight ship, organized, no nonsense, and fast. Most of the old-timers respected her. The younger mechanics? Not so much. Some were polite, but others made offhand comments about women in shops or asked to speak to the man in charge. Carla didn't argue. She let her work speak louder, and on most days, it did. That morning in late April started like any other. Ray had driven his old Ford F-100 into town because the alternator belt had given up somewhere between the barn and the post office. He wasn't in a rush. Nothing in Ray's life moved fast anymore. He parked outside Jensen's, shuffled inside in his worn-out boots, and nodded to Ethan, the only kid in the shop who greeted him by name. "Morning, Mr. Whitmore," Ethan said, tossing a rag over his shoulder. "Coffee's fresh." Ray grunted in appreciation and walked over to the side counter where an old thermos of community brew sat beside a cracked ceramic mug that might have predated cell phones. Carla was under a lifted pickup, arguing with a torqued wrench. Ray didn't bother her. He was only there to borrow a 14mm box wrench and maybe listen to the clink of tools for a while. Something about that sound settled his mind. Then came the noise that turned every head in the shop, the metallic screech of a tow truck dragging something heavy and very expensive into the parking lot. "Holy," Ethan said, stepping outside. A sleek silver coupe with Italian lines and a deep front grille emerged from behind the rollback flatbed. It was a Cavallari V8 Supersport, one of only a dozen ever made. The kind of car you saw in magazines but never expected to see in a town where the most exotic vehicle was a lifted Ford Raptor with deer blood on the bumper. The car was pristine except for one detail: it didn't run. And from the tight-lipped expression of the driver who stepped out, that fact was very expensive. Carla wiped her hands on a rag and walked toward the tow truck. "Who owns this spaceship?" she asked. The driver, a uniformed hauler with sunglasses too large for his face, motioned toward the car. "Some rich guy out near Lake Ray Hubbard. Says no one in Dallas could fix it. You're next on his list." Carla raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And what's it doing here?" "Ticking sound in the engine, loss of power, real subtle. He says diagnostics didn't catch anything." Carla bent down, peered inside the hood vents, then stepped back. "Tell him we'll take a look, but no promises." The driver shrugged, lowered the car, and drove off. Ray, coffee in hand, stood near the open bay door, studying the Cavallari like an old wolf sniffing the wind. Carla noticed him watching. Beautiful car, she said. Ray nodded. Never seen one outside of a wind tunnel. You know this model? Designed for endurance racing in the Alps. Only 12 built. V8 twin-scroll turbo, magnesium block, electronically tuned valve timing. Carla blinked. You read that in a magazine? Ray sipped his coffee. Something like that. He turned to Ethan. I'll take that wrench now, if you're not using it. As Ethan handed him the tool, Toby Hartman, the shop's chief mechanic, appeared, smirking. Well, look who's lecturing about Italian race cars. Next thing you know, he'll be rebuilding jet engines in the back. Carla shot Toby a warning look. Knock it off. But Ray didn't flinch. He simply took the wrench, tipped his cap slightly, and turned to leave. As he walked out into the Texas sunlight, a faint gust carried the smell of gasoline and spring wildflowers. Behind him, the Cavallari sat motionless in the garage bay, gleaming like a spaceship landed in a cornfield. No one knew it yet, but Garland was about to change, and it would all start with a bet. The sun was already high by the time Toby Hartman had the hood of the car open and half the engine disassembled. A thick streak of grease ran down his forearm as he stared into the guts of the rare sports car with a frustrated scowl. His workstation, usually the cleanest in the shop, was a cluttered mess of tools, coffee cups, and open manuals. Everything's reading clean, he muttered, tapping the diagnostic screen again. No vacuum leak. Fuel injectors are perfect. Plugs replaced. Spark solid. He revved the engine gently. That sound came again. A faint rhythmic flutter, like a hiccup in the machine's breath. Anyone else might have dismissed it, but Toby's pride wouldn't let him. Still doing that weird fluttery thing? Ethan asked, cautiously approaching. Toby didn't even look up. It's not a fluttery thing. It's a subtle compression irregularity that shouldn't exist in an engine like this. And yes, it is. Don't remind me. In the corner of the garage, Ray sipped from his styrofoam cup, quietly watching. He wasn't eavesdropping, not intentionally anyway, but Ray had a way of noticing things without trying. He stood by the wall, near the old tool cabinet, pretending to study a wrench he didn't really need. Carla came out of the office, clipboard in hand. How we doing, Toby? Wasting time, he grunted. 3 hours and nothing adds up. The onboard computer says it's fine. Compression test says it's fine, but I hear it. It's not fine. You want me to call the dealership again? She offered. Toby scoffed. Number. Then they'll just tow it back and say it's our fault. I'll figure it out. It's probably some ghost in the timing or a stuck valve train component. He wiped his hands aggressively. Damn thing is acting like it's got a haunted crankshaft. Ray cleared his throat softly. Toby turned. You got something to say, old-timer? Ray held up his hands, placid. Didn't mean to interrupt. Just that ticking. It's not ticking, Toby snapped. It's fluttering. Ray nodded slowly. Okay, that flutter sounds like residual pressure imbalance, maybe from a mismatched compression curve, possibly a harmonic echo caused by the actuator not syncing right with the crank's revolutions. There was a pause. Ethan blinked. Carla lowered her clipboard. Toby, meanwhile, looked at Ray like he'd sprouted a second head. Then he laughed, a dry, sharp laugh that filled the garage and bounced off the tool cabinets. You're telling me that a guy who fixes broken tillers and rusty plows in his backyard just diagnosed what 3 sets of scanners couldn't? I didn't diagnose anything, Ray said simply, just saying what it sounds like. Toby stepped forward, smirking. You think you can fix it? Ray looked back at him. Didn't say that either. No, but you implied it. He raised an eyebrow, turning to the rest of the crew. Did you all hear that? Grandpa Whitmore here just told us he knows what's wrong. Carla frowned. Come on, Toby, don't start. But Toby was already reaching into his wallet. He pulled out a thick wad of bills, thumbed through them with exaggerated flair, and slapped 10 $100 bills on the bench beside the engine. Tell you what, old man, I've spent 20 years under hoods. I've rebuilt engines blindfolded. If you can fix this fluttering compression whatever by tomorrow morning, that money's yours. If not, you mop the floors in here for a month. Deal? Ray looked at the money, then at Toby, then at Carla. I don't gamble, he said quietly. Carla crossed her arms. Toby, enough. But Toby wasn't backing down. "What's the matter, Ray? Thought you just heard the problem. Thought it was just a misaligned harmonic resonance." He grinned. "Or was that just fancy talk you pulled from a YouTube video?" Ray didn't respond. Ethan looked between them nervously. "Guys, maybe we should just cool it." Carla raised her hand. "Quiet, Ethan." Then she turned to Ray. "You want to take a look? Tonight, after close. No customers, no distractions." Ray was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he gave a small nod. "All right, I'll take a look." Toby clapped his hands mockingly. "Great. Make sure you bring your magic tractor oil." Carla stepped forward, picking up the stack of money. "This stays with me. If Ray wants to take a shot, it's on his terms. No one messes with him. Understood?" Toby shrugged, still grinning. "Sure. Let the old man tinker. Just don't say I didn't warn you." As the crew dispersed, murmuring amongst themselves, Ethan stayed behind. He glanced at Ray, who was staring at the car like it was speaking to him. "You really think you can fix it?" Ethan whispered. Ray didn't look at him. He just took another sip of coffee. "I think I'll know more once the shop's quiet." The garage felt different after hours. Without the clatter of tools or the banter of mechanics, Jensen's garage fell into an eerie, contemplative silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting elongated shadows across the concrete floor. Outside, the street lamps of Garland flickered in the humid Texas night. Inside, the only movement came from Raymond Whitmore, alone, deliberate and unhurried. Ray had waited until Carla and the crew had left. She had handed him the keys without a word, only a nod that held trust, and perhaps a flicker of concern. "Lock up when you're done," she'd said. He had nodded, just as silent. Now, the whole place was his, not in possession, but in purpose. There was no audience, no expectations, only the task. He stood before the exotic sports car, the low-slung European beauty that had thrown Toby and the others into fits. The hood was already propped open. Beneath it, the W12 engine gleamed with precision craftsmanship and concealed complexity. Ray rolled up his sleeves and reached for a flashlight. Not the garage's state-of-the-art diagnostic scanner, just an old, brass-bodied maglite he'd kept since the 80s. He clicked it on. The beam cut through the engine bay like a scalpel. His movements were slow, not from age, but from method. Every step was calculated. He didn't dart from tool to tool or jab at parts with guesswork. Instead, Ray moved with the grace of someone who had once spent years doing this for machines that had to fly under enemy fire. He crouched low, tilting his head to listen, really listen, to the subtle residual echo of tension within the block. It was like reading Braille with your ears, the kind of diagnostic work that had long been replaced by sensors and screens. But Ray trusted his hands more than any machine. He ran his fingers along the intake manifold, stopping when he felt the tiniest vibration, like a heartbeat out of rhythm. The engine had been shut off hours ago, but it still whispered secrets in the silence. Ray adjusted the beam of his flashlight, narrowing in on a small valve tucked deep between the timing belt and fuel rail. It looked perfect, brand new even, but something about the way it sat didn't feel right. As he examined it closer, memories began to bleed into the present. Flashback. 25 years earlier, a cavernous aerospace hangar in Fort Worth. Ray stood in a crisp blue jumpsuit bearing the Lockheed Martin logo, arms crossed, watching a team of younger engineers debate over a prototype design. He had already solved the issue they were arguing about 10 minutes ago, but he stayed quiet. Sometimes teaching meant letting others wrestle with it. He was the lead mechanical systems engineer on a next-generation propulsion module. His designs had been studied in Pentagon briefings, and his name once floated in circles, discussing top-tier civilian aerospace consultants. Back then, Ray's mind was a whirlwind of pressure equations, vibration tolerances, and adaptive systems. But it was also preoccupied. He remembered the voicemail that had come through his pager that morning. "There's been an accident." The words that followed had broken more than just his concentration. A drunk driver, a highway divider, a station wagon carrying his wife Laurel and his 10-year-old son Matthew, gone, both of them. In an instant, Ray had returned to work for exactly 4 more days. He'd stood in that same hangar, looked at that same team, and realized he couldn't explain combustion ratios when his world had been hollowed out. So he left, just walked away. No press release, no farewell email, just silence and grief. Back to the garage. Present night. Ray blinked hard, pushing the images back into the vault he'd built in his memory. The car in front of him wasn't a fighter jet or stealth drone. It was just a machine. But the way it was misbehaving, it reminded him of a similar harmonic issue in a reconnaissance craft years ago. Back then, the imbalance was caused by a hairline imperfection in a titanium rotor, microscopic, but enough to throw everything out of sync at high revolutions. Here, the culprit was more mundane, but just as insidious. Ray reached for a small inspection mirror on an extendable rod and slid it deep between the intake housing and the valve cam. The mirror caught a subtle deformation in a bolt head, barely perceptible. The torque pattern wasn't correct. Someone had over-tightened the component, causing it to misalign under heat cycles. It was a textbook example of what Ray had once taught as delayed resonance deviation. To the untrained eye, or even the average mechanic, it looked like nothing, just a tight bolt. But the deviation would cascade, creating an inconsistent pressure echo within the cylinder block, precisely matching the phantom knock sound Toby couldn't figure out. Ray sighed softly. He reached into his canvas bag and pulled out a compact torque wrench he'd kept from his military days. The metal still bore the faint engravings of an old airbase serial number. His fingers moved with familiarity. He loosened the bolt, recalibrated the position, and retorqued it to exactly 42.7 foot-pounds, no more, no less. Then he repeated the inspection across the entire valve train, realigning 4 other bolts that had suffered from the same issue. It wasn't negligence. Whoever had installed them had done so with confidence, but without understanding the delicate balance required by that particular engine design. The next part of the night passed in silence. Ray worked on the valve timing, made a minute adjustment to the actuator bracket, and applied a graphite compound to one of the mounts to reduce oscillation. Not once did he touch the diagnostic computer. He didn't need it. His process wasn't guesswork. It was precision from decades of pattern recognition. By 3 a.m., he was finished. The floor around the vehicle was spotless. Tools returned to their proper racks, not a smear of grease out of place. He stood for a long while, just listening. Then finally, he reached into the driver's seat, inserted the key, and turned it halfway. The dashboard lit up. He paused, then turned the ignition fully. The engine came to life with a deep, velvety hum, smooth as a symphony. No tick, no chatter, just the resonant purr of a perfectly tuned machine. Ray nodded, almost imperceptibly. Then he turned the engine off. He walked to the small break room, brewed a fresh pot of black coffee, and took a seat on the creaky vinyl bench near the window. In his lap sat an old, leather-bound notebook. He opened it, revealing pages filled with tiny, precise handwriting. Schematics, notes, personal calculations no one else would ever understand without context. With a mechanical pencil sharpened to a fine point, he jotted a short note. Bentley, intake resonance, misalignment caused by thermal torque, distortion on cam bolts. Fixed manually. Recommend carbon fiber thermal shield for future. He closed the book. No need for applause. No need for acknowledgement. Ray finished his coffee and walked back into the garage. He gave the Bentley one last look, then picked up a rag and began wiping down the hood. The shine returned with every stroke. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. But something inside him, something long dormant, had stirred. By the time dawn crept over Garland, Raymond Whitmore had locked the garage, tucked the keys into the slot Carla had shown him, and disappeared into the morning fog like he'd never been there. But the engine, it would speak for him. The morning sun had only just begun to rise over Garland when Carla Jensen pulled into the gravel lot of her garage, coffee in one hand, keys jangling in the other. The sleepy haze of the early hour still clung to her, but the instant she pushed open the door and stepped inside, that fog was blown away by what she heard, or rather, what she didn't. The garage, usually still and dark before the crew arrived, was already alive. From the far side of the main bay came the low, velvet purr of an engine running, clean, steady, and unmistakably flawless. Carla froze mid-step. It was the Bentley. She hurried across the bay, boots echoing off the concrete, her eyes scanning for signs of life. The hood was down, the lights were on, and beside the workbench sat Ray, the old farmer-turned-janitor, casually wiping grease from his hands with a rag that looked as worn as his jeans. He glanced up, offering her the same soft nod he always did. No trace of excitement, no triumphant grin, just calm. "Morning, Miss Jensen," he said, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Carla blinked. "Ray, is that the Bentley?" He gave a single nod. "You fixed it." Another nod. "Ran diagnostics the old-fashioned way. Got her purring again around 3:30. Carla rushed to the car and bent down to listen. The engine was like silk, deep and smooth, not a hitch in the cycle. No more of the subtle tick, no misfire, no hesitation, just power, silent power. This isn't possible," she muttered. "Guess it is," Ray said, shrugging. Before Carla could gather her thoughts, the front door creaked open, and in walked Toby Hartman, still yawning, coffee cup in hand. He stopped short when he saw the Bentley, idling calmly. "What the hell?" His eyes darted from the car to Carla to Ray. "No way." Ray stood up slowly. "Morning, Toby." "You didn't—" Toby stepped forward, his face contorting with disbelief. He yanked open the driver's side door, slipped inside, and revved the engine lightly. The hum held perfect. Then he cut the ignition and popped the hood. Over the next 5 minutes, Toby combed through every inch of the engine bay like a man possessed. He checked every wire, traced every line, even pulled out his tablet and scanned the car's onboard computer for updates. But everything was working better than it had the day it left the factory. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. "This thing's cleaner than when it got here." Carla watched silently, arms folded. She knew exactly what was running through Toby's mind: panic, pride, and something dangerously close to awe. "He did it, Toby," she said finally. "You made the bet. He won." Toby didn't answer. His jaw was clenched so tight his teeth might have cracked. The rest of the crew began to arrive, and word spread fast. Within 20 minutes, the entire team stood gathered around the Bentley, murmuring like a group of pilgrims before a shrine. Daniel, the youngest of the bunch, bent down to check the oil filter. Jessica, one of the newer hires, ran her fingers along a newly machined valve adjustment Ray had apparently made from spare parts. "Who is this guy?" someone whispered. "He's been mopping floors for the past year and just outwrenched all of us," said another. Ethan Morales stood toward the back, not speaking. He didn't need to. He was watching Ray. Ray didn't bask in the attention. He simply returned the tools to their original places, cleaned the workstation with practiced care, and walked to the far end of the bay. Ethan followed him, still quiet. That's when he saw it, tucked between the pages of a worn brown notebook, sitting open beside a thermos of black coffee. Scribbled in tight, perfect lines were notes, diagrams, calculations, handwritten, precise. Ethan leaned closer. Displacement misfire traced to anomalous harmonic resonance in cylinder 4. It read, traced to microstress crack on intake timing gear. Acoustic signature matched prior Lockheed protocol. Lockheed? Ray noticed Ethan's gaze and gently closed the notebook. "You always take notes like that?" Ethan asked, trying not to sound too curious. Ray gave a slow nod. "Old habit." "Lockheed Martin kind of habit?" Ray said nothing. Instead, he turned and picked up the coffee thermos, took a slow sip, and stared out the garage window at the rising sun. Ethan didn't press, but something in the air had shifted. Back near the car, Carla watched as her staff slowly began to circle away, returning to their stations with stunned looks and more questions than answers. She walked over to Ray, stopping a few feet from him. "You didn't have to do this," she said gently. "But I'm glad you did." Ray gave her that small, worn smile. "The machine needed fixing." Carla tilted her head. "You're more than just a guy who fixes things, Ray. You know that, right?" He didn't answer, but his eyes softened. Then he turned back toward the bench, grabbed his mop from the corner, and began cleaning up oil spots near the car, just like he did every morning, as if the night's miracle hadn't happened at all. That, more than anything, made Carla's stomach twist with a strange mix of admiration and unease. She wasn't sure what Ray's story was, but now she knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just some retired farmer with an eye for tools. He was something else entirely. And Garland, Texas had only begun to learn who he really was. The morning sun crept across the concrete floor of Jensen's garage, casting golden streaks through the high windows. The atmosphere was unusually still. The mechanics, usually bustling around with half-eaten donuts and engine grease under their fingernails, stood gathered around the now silent centerpiece of the shop, a custom-built 1985 Tornado GT, humming gently with newfound life. Carla stood beside it, arms folded, eyes narrowed. Ray Whitmore sat on an overturned crate, calmly sipping from a styrofoam cup of lukewarm black coffee. He'd already changed back into his familiar oil-stained coveralls, blending back into the scenery like a mechanic's ghost. The soft rumble of an approaching engine broke the silence. All heads turned toward the front bay door as a gleaming black Cadillac Escalade rolled to a slow stop. The driver's door opened with smooth precision, and out stepped Harold Finch. He was a tall man, with a presence that seemed to quiet even the squeakiest of tools. His silver hair was slicked back in a style that suggested both wealth and control, and his dark wool overcoat looked entirely out of place in the humid Texas morning. His eyes scanned the garage with cool purpose until they landed on Ray. He froze. The recognition hit Harold like a hammer. "My God," he said quietly. "It's you." Ray looked up from his coffee, his expression unchanged. "Morning," he said simply. Harold stepped forward, ignoring Carla, ignoring the car, ignoring the watching staff. "You're Raymond Whitmore," he said, voice hushed but sharp. "You designed the VT-8 variable torque system, the original blueprint that became the Tornado's engine platform. I saw you present it at the Austin Institute back in '86. You're the man who made this car possible." The silence in the shop deepened, as though the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Carla's eyes darted from Harold to Ray. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Toby, standing a few paces behind, blinked as though someone had just told him gravity was optional. Ray didn't flinch. "That was a long time ago," he said. "But it was you," Harold insisted, stepping even closer. "I remember the sketches, the prototype cutaway model, your voice. You wore a brown tweed jacket with leather elbows and misquoted Einstein during your closing remarks. You said, 'In mechanics, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication.'" Ray let out a soft exhale, equal parts amusement and resignation. "I said that?" "You did," Harold said, smiling now, but with a touch of awe. "And it stuck with me for 30 years. Carla finally found her voice. "Ray," she said slowly, "is he telling the truth?" Ray looked at her, then at the stunned circle of mechanics around them. His face remained calm, but the weight in his eyes had shifted, like he was debating whether to shut a door or crack it open just a little. "I used to work on aircraft engines," he said, voice even. "Design systems for Lockheed, did a little automotive consulting on the side. The Tornado GT was one of those side projects." "But that's not just some car," Carla said. "That's the car. The VT-8 engine was revolutionary. It's still in use today. That system changed how mid-range torque distribution works in half the industry." Ray gave a soft shrug. "Did what I could, then life took a turn. So I changed course." Harold looked like he might cry. "They told me you were dead." "Not dead," Ray replied, draining the last of his coffee. "Just retired early." "But why?" Carla stepped forward, her voice rising with each word. "Why walk away from that kind of legacy, from a name that should be in engineering textbooks?" Ray turned to her fully now. His posture was straight, but his eyes softened. "Because names in textbooks don't raise the dead," he said quietly. No one spoke. The weight of his words hung in the air like smoke. Harold stepped back slightly, clearly unsure if he'd just tripped over something sacred. Toby looked at the ground. Ethan, near the workbench, held the edge of his notebook tighter, his young face filled with something more than just surprise. It was reverence. Ray wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm not here to make headlines," he said. "I came in for a wrench. That's it." Carla stared at him. and fixed a car that none of us could figure out, overnight, with no diagnostics, just with your hands. Ray nodded once. It's what I used to do. Harold found his voice again. Mr. Whitmore, Raymond, listen, I have a company now, research division, engine innovation. We've been trying to recreate the responsiveness of your original VT system for years, and here you are, quietly fixing it in a garage in Garland, Texas. You belong somewhere better than this. I belong, Ray said, with a pointed glance toward the crew, where I can be useful, not showcased. Carla took a step closer to him. Ray, you've been coming here for years, drinking my bad coffee, borrowing tools, fixing old lawnmowers for neighbors. I thought you were just a quiet old guy with a gift for engines. I am, Ray said. Harold let out a short laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. Number, you're a pioneer. You disappeared from the engineering world and everyone wondered what happened to you. And now, Ray said, you know. A long silence followed. Then Carla spoke again. Ray, whatever you were before, whoever you were, you're not just some guy fixing tractors anymore. You're someone the world tried to forget, but maybe now, maybe the world needs to remember. Ray gave a half smile. That's a flattering thought. I'm serious, Carla said. You could train people, teach. You've got more knowledge in your pinky than most schools cram into 4 years. Ray looked around at the crew. Ethan's eyes locked onto his like a student waiting for the first page of a secret book to open. Finally, Ray spoke. I'm not interested in spotlights or headlines, he said. I used to build engines. Now I fix them. Sometimes that's enough. And with that, he picked up his toolbox and walked toward the back door of the garage, same as he always did, leaving behind a garage full of stunned faces and one very rare engine purring like a tiger in its sleep. Carla stood still for a moment, watching him go. Then, softly, almost to herself, she whispered, Who are you, Ray Whitmore? And though she knew he wouldn't answer, something in her gut told her they'd only just scratched the surface. Ray had just finished wiping down the last of his tools when Harold Finch's silver SUV pulled into the gravel lot of Jensen's garage. The morning sun caught the polished chrome rims as the vehicle rolled to a stop, drawing a few glances from passing cars on Main Street. The townspeople were still buzzing about what had happened the day before, but this visit wasn't about car repairs. Harold stepped out of the vehicle wearing a crisp navy suit, a stark contrast to the dusty pickup trucks and oil-stained coveralls surrounding him. Ray straightened his back and wiped his hands on an old rag as Harold approached with a calm but purposeful stride. Morning, Mr. Whitmore, Harold greeted, nodding. Got a few minutes? Ray tilted his head and shrugged slightly. If it's not about placing another bet. Harold cracked a smile. Not this time. I was hoping you'd come by my research facility outside of Dallas. There's something I'd like to show you, and maybe something I'd like you to help with. Before Ray could respond, Carla stepped out from her office, coffee mug in hand. Everything okay out here? Harold turned to her with polite warmth. Ms. Jensen, your garage did a fine job housing a miracle last night. She smirked. I'd say that miracle came from the guy with the mop. I'd agree, Harold said, turning back to Ray. That's exactly why I'm here. Ray crossed his arms. You said research facility. What do you want me to do there? Present, Harold replied plainly. I want you to walk my team through the original design philosophy behind that engine. Your modifications proved there's still more to learn from your work. Most of my engineers weren't even born when you drew those blueprints. I think it's time they learned from the source. Ray didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted toward the corner of the garage, where he usually kept his mop and bucket. The silence stretched until Carla spoke. You know, she said slowly, I've been thinking, maybe it's time we start something right here too. Ray turned to her. A class, she continued. Basic engine theory, mechanical diagnostics. Just one night a week. This town is full of young folks who fix things by trial and error. They could learn from someone who actually understands the why behind the how. Ray frowned slightly. I'm no teacher. You taught that car last night how to behave, Carla said. I think that counts. Ethan, who had been hovering near the tool chest, pretending to organize sockets, stepped forward nervously. "I'd sign up," he said. "No questions asked." Ray gave him a look, unreadable as always. "I mean it," Ethan added. "I've been trying to figure out stuff like compression ratios and timing lag by watching YouTube and old manuals. Yesterday, when you explained the misfire like it was breathing out of sync, it just clicked." Harold glanced between them, intrigued. "You already have an apprentice?" "No," Ray said quickly, almost defensively. "But maybe he should," Carla interjected, raising an eyebrow. Ray shifted uncomfortably. The quiet of his life had been his armor, and now it was being pried loose from all sides. Harold stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ray, I understand what it feels like to walk away from something you love because the cost of staying was too high. But what you did with that Bentley, that was more than a fix. That was legacy work, and legacy doesn't belong in a notebook tucked in a barn." Ray swallowed hard, then looked toward the open garage doors. The light of the day spilled in across the concrete floor, highlighting the familiar rhythm of socket wrenches, the hum of compressors, the smell of grease and grit. It was a world he understood. Clean, mechanical, predictable. But the air around him was different now. People saw him. "Let me think on it," Ray said finally. "I'm not saying no," Harold smiled. "That's all I ask." They shook hands, and Harold promised to send over details about the facility visit. Once he drove off, Carla leaned against the workbench and looked at Ray. "I know it's not easy," she said. "You didn't ask for this attention, but people are watching now, and they're ready to listen." Ray let out a long breath. "That's what scares me." "I get that," Carla said, "but hiding your mind is like parking a Ferrari in a barn and never starting it. It's a waste." Ethan stepped forward, clutching a small notebook. "If you're serious about maybe teaching, I started writing down questions, stuff I never got answers to." Ray took the notebook from him, flipping through the pages slowly. The handwriting was rough, but the questions were genuine. Why do cold starts knock more on older engines? What does pre-detonation sound like? Why do some engines pull to the right under load? "These are good," Ray muttered. "I got more," Ethan said quickly. "Just didn't want to overwhelm you." Ray handed the notebook back. "Come by tomorrow at 6 a.m. before shift. We'll start then." Ethan's face lit up like a light bulb. "Really?" Ray nodded. "But bring coffee. None of that gas station stuff." "I swear I'll bring the good stuff," Ethan said, already backing away with a goofy grin plastered on his face. Carla chuckled as she watched him walk off, then looked back at Ray. "You're really gonna do it." Ray picked up a rag and started wiping down a ratchet. "Might as well. Kid's got the questions. Someone ought to give him answers." "And the other offer?" Carla asked. "I'll visit Finch's place," Ray said, "but I'm not trading my flannel shirts for lab coats just yet." Carla raised her mug in mock salute. "To mops, motors, and maybe mentorship." Ray gave her a faint smile, the kind he hadn't worn in a long time. For once, the garage didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like the beginning of something new. The morning after Ray's quiet visit to Harold Finch's estate, the town of Garland felt like it was holding its breath. The story of the old farmer who fixed a $1 million engine had traveled faster than the Texas wind. At first, it was just whispers in the local diner, but by noon, it was on the radio. By evening, a headline appeared in the Garland Weekly Gazette. "Mystery mechanic stuns industry. Who is Raymond Whitmore?" Inside Jensen's garage, Carla stared at the newspaper spread open on her workbench. The photo, grainy but unmistakable, showed Ray wiping grease from his hands in front of Finch's vintage sports car. Her heart sank, not out of betrayal, but dread. She had asked him gently the night before if he wanted to share his story. He only smiled and said, "Some things are better left in the oil pan." But secrets, especially the ones soaked in truth, have a way of leaking. The article was written by Megan Tate, a sharp-eyed journalist who had covered corporate misconduct in Dallas for over a decade. According to the report, Ray wasn't just a retired engineer. He had been a top-tier propulsion specialist at Lockheed Martin, working under classified contracts for advanced military vehicles. Then, nearly 2 decades ago, Ray's name vanished from public records, until now. Tucked in the third paragraph was the sting. In 2004, Whitmore reportedly turned down a $2.5 million consulting bonus from Omnidyne Systems. A defense subcontractor later investigated for misappropriation of government funds. Not long after, Whitmore was quietly terminated from his post, accused of leaking proprietary designs. He served a 3-month sentence in federal custody before charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. Sources suggest the real motive behind the charges was retaliation. Carla felt like the air had been punched out of her chest. Ethan read the article over her shoulder, eyebrows knotted. "They tried to bury him," he muttered. The phone rang nonstop. Customers, journalists, even out-of-town mechanics wanted to know if the rumors were true. Some called to praise. Others asked if that felon still worked there. By late afternoon, a black SUV with satellite gear parked outside the garage. A TV crew stepped out. Ray was gone. No goodbye, no note, just a clean workbench, an empty coffee cup, and the scent of motor oil. Carla searched the back room first, then the barn, then the road. It wasn't until she got to the edge of town, near the railway crossing, that she found his old pickup parked under a cottonwood tree. Inside, on the dash, was a yellow legal pad. "Carla, thank you for the quiet." That night, Garland became a circus. A larger news station ran the story statewide. Blog posts popped up speculating about what Ray might know. Had he uncovered corruption? Was he hiding more? The internet did what it always did. It twisted a human story into a spectacle. Ray, meanwhile, drove back to his farmhouse under cover of dark. He parked behind the barn and entered through the back door. He didn't turn on the lights. He sat in his recliner, cracked the window, and listened to the crickets. Alone. But he wasn't angry. Not really. He had known this day might come. Flashbacks danced in the silence. Courtrooms, interrogation rooms, fluorescent lights. He remembered sitting across from Omnidyne's attorneys, watching them lie with polished smiles. Remembered the cold metal bench in the holding cell. But most of all, he remembered the phone call he never got to make. His wife and daughter had died in a car crash on the same day he was arraigned. Wrong time, wrong road, wrong life. Ray leaned back and closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to remember them how they were before all of this. The next morning, Carla arrived at the farmhouse, breathless. She didn't knock, just let herself in. "Ray," she called into the dark living room, "I know you're here, and I know what they're saying, but I don't care." No response. She walked further in and saw him sitting in the chair, holding a small framed photograph, his daughter on a swing, mid-laugh. Carla knelt beside him. "They don't know you," she whispered, "but we do." Ray's voice cracked for the first time. "They'll twist it, like they did before." "Then let's untwist it together," she said. "You don't have to hide anymore." Ray looked up at her. There was something in his eyes, a spark, maybe, or just the faintest flicker of belief. The dirt road to Ray's farmhouse was still slick with morning dew, as Ethan Morales pedaled up on an old mountain bike, the kind with squeaky brakes and duct-taped handlebars. His breath puffed in the early air, not from exhaustion, but from anticipation. He wasn't sure what he'd say once he got there, only that he needed to say something. Ray's farmhouse came into view like a memory, weather-beaten wood, rusting tin roof, and a tire swing that hadn't moved in a decade. No cars, no sound, but the cicadas warming up their afternoon chorus. Ethan leaned his bike against a fence post and stood for a long moment at the gate, debating if he should really go through with this. But then he saw Ray. The old man was out back near the shed, on one knee, working methodically to change the blade on a rusted-out bush hog. He hadn't noticed Ethan yet, and there was something sacred in his stillness, like a man lost in a rhythm that time couldn't interrupt. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitmore?" Ray turned his head slowly, not startled, just watchful. "You come here to see if I ran off to Mexico or something?" Ethan smiled. "No, sir. I came here because I think you knew my dad." Ray rose stiffly, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that had seen better days. "Your dad?" "Luis Morales," Ethan said, voice a little too fast now that it had begun. "He served in Iraq, 3rd Battalion. He was a field mechanic. Got hit during a convoy attack in 2004. The report said he survived because someone held pressure on his wounds and rigged a cooling system to stop the Humvee from catching fire. But he never talked about who that was. Ray's expression didn't change, but his eyes clouded. I found an old photo of you two, Ethan continued. He pulled a folded, yellowing image from his jacket. It was tucked in a toolbox we kept in the garage. My mom said he never liked talking about that day, but he always kept this picture close. Ray took the photo with trembling fingers. It was faded, but the memory was sharp. Two men, side by side, covered in dust and ash, smiling like survivors. I remember Luis, Ray finally said. His voice cracked like gravel under tires. He was good, steady hands, quick thinker. That day, he saved me just as much as I saved him. For a long moment, neither said anything. The wind moved gently through the tall grass. Ethan looked out at the open fields and then back at Ray. I wanted you to know, you mattered to him. He passed away when I was 10. Lung cancer, probably from the burn pits over there. Ray looked away, toward the barn, as if trying to hide the sting in his eyes. I'm sorry, kid. I didn't know. I didn't come here for an apology, Ethan said gently. I came because I wanted to say thank you, and because I need a mentor. I don't want to just change oil and rotate tires my whole life. I want to understand how things work, how you saw what no one else did in that engine. Ray stayed silent for a long beat. Then he looked down at the old photo again, folded it carefully, and handed it back. Keep that, he'd want you to. Before Ethan could say more, the gravel crunched under tires behind them. A silver sedan came to a halt by the fence, and Carla stepped out. Her jeans were dusty, and her hair was pulled back in a rush. She carried an envelope in one hand. Ray raised an eyebrow. You lost, or just out recruiting now? Carla walked over and handed him the letter. This came to the shop, Harold Finch's letterhead. Ray didn't take it at first, just stared at the thick paper as if it might bite. Carla continued. He wants you to be the keynote speaker at the National Engineering Symposium in Denver. Said you could inspire a new generation. His words. Ray shook his head slowly. That man doesn't take no for an answer, does he? He said he'd fly you there first class, put you up in a suite, whatever you want, Carla added, half amused, half serious. Ethan stepped closer, nervous but hopeful. You should go. People need to hear you, Mr. Whitmore. I needed to hear you. Ray looked between the two of them, the young man whose father had been a brother in arms, and the woman who believed in second chances even when he didn't. I'm not used to being needed anymore, Ray muttered. Carla gave him a lopsided grin. Well, tough luck. Welcome back to Relevance. Ray opened the envelope, his hands surprisingly steady now. He read the letter silently, eyes scanning the neat, elegant print. At the bottom was a personal note scribbled in ink. You were born to teach, not to rust. Ray exhaled deeply, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled. Well, he said, folding the letter and tucking it in his back pocket. I suppose the cows can survive without me for a weekend. The morning sun poured over the Austin skyline as Ray stepped out of the black town car. His boots hit the concrete with a quiet thud, oddly soft amidst the bustle of attendees filing into the Texas Convention Center. He adjusted his old corduroy blazer, wrinkled but clean, and looked up at the towering banner above the main hall, National Symposium of Advanced Engineering and Innovation. Ray Whitmore's name was listed at the very bottom of the speaker panel, just below a PhD from MIT and a tech CEO with a $2 billion valuation. Quite the crowd, Carla whispered beside him, her confident stride matching her tailored navy blue suit. You nervous? Ray gave her a sidelong glance. Not nervous, just not used to wearing shoes without grease on them. Ethan trailed behind, wide-eyed like a kid at his first air show. Mr. Whitmore, they've got a whole section set up for mechanical breakthroughs, real-time engine simulations, magnetic valve demos, even regenerative turbine tech. It's insane. Ray didn't say much. He just walked slowly through the lobby, nodding politely at strangers in suits, feeling every eye lingering a moment too long. Recognition, curiosity, maybe a bit of awe. That uneasy spotlight he'd tried so hard to avoid for decades was now warming his back. The green room backstage was cold, sterile, and humming with tension. Presenters rehearsed lines, paced the floor, or scrolled endlessly on tablets. Ray sat still in a metal folding chair, hands resting on his lap, his leather-bound notebook sitting beside him like an old friend. A young assistant approached. "Mr. Whitmore, you're up next. You have 15 minutes. 15's plenty," he replied, rising slowly. As he walked toward the curtain, Carla gave his arm a gentle squeeze. "Go remind them what real engineering looks like." The stage lights hit him like a wall. The room was packed. Hundreds of engineers, executives, academics, rows upon rows of eyes. A few murmurs fluttered through the crowd as the MC introduced him. And now, a surprise late addition to our program. Raymond Whitmore, former lead systems engineer at Lockheed Martin's propulsion division. He stood behind the podium for a beat too long. Then he stepped away from it entirely and walked to the center of the stage. "I'm not much for podiums," he began. His voice, gravelly and low, carried through the room like a steady piston stroke. "They remind me of courtrooms, and I've had my fill of those." Laughter, scattered and cautious. "I came here not to talk about cutting-edge tech, but about something older, something quieter. Discipline, observation. Hands in the grease, ears on the hum, heart in the job." He pulled out his notebook, held it up. "This little thing has followed me from war zones to garages. It doesn't run on electricity, and it won't crash from a software update. But it's got everything I ever learned. And I learned most of it not from professors, but from machines. Machines that didn't care who you were, only whether you listened." Silence. Then he told the story of a faulty intake valve he spotted in the field that saved 30 lives, of the moment he turned down a bribe and chose exile instead of silence, of how he found peace fixing tractors in Garland, Texas, until a young man with honest eyes handed him a wrench and asked to learn. He ended quietly, almost a whisper. "We don't need more tech billionaires. We need more teachers, more good hands, and more young people who know they're not too small to build something great." The room stood, every single person. Applause thundered, not as if for a celebrity, but for a truth long buried. Afterward, executives crowded around him. A woman from Detroit offered him a seat on an innovation council. A man from Silicon Valley promised a blank check for whatever project he wanted. Another pitched him a partnership with a renewable engine startup. Ray shook their hands, looked each one in the eye, and declined them all. "I don't want titles," he said. "I don't need labs, but if you really want to help, fund a scholarship for rural kids, ones with busted knuckles and big dreams." And they did. By sundown, Carla had 3 voicemail offers from foundations wanting to back a new initiative. Ethan had already started drafting a name, the Whitmore Fellowship for Rural Mechanics and Engineering. Back at the hotel, Ray sat by the window with a paper cup of black coffee, staring down at the city below. "You did it," Carla said, leaning against the doorframe. Ray didn't smile. He just exhaled, long and even. "No," he said. "We did. But this is just the ignition. Let's see how far we can go on one tank of belief." The first day of class started without a bell. There were no desks, no whiteboards, just grease-stained tool benches, worn wrenches, and the familiar smell of motor oil and brake fluid clinging to the air. Ray stood at the center of the garage, a shop rag slung over one shoulder, his eyes scanning the small group of young men and women gathered before him. Most wore trucker hats and scuffed boots. A few shifted nervously, unsure of what exactly they'd signed up for. But they were here, and that meant something. The sign above the garage had been replaced just the day before. The bold lettering now read, "Whitmore and Jensen Mechanics Academy." Carla insisted on putting Ray's name first, and Ray had objected, mildly of course, but she wouldn't hear otherwise. "You're the reason this place matters now," she'd said. "People aren't coming for oil changes anymore, Ray. They're coming for a future." Ray didn't like speeches. He preferred torque specs and valve clearances to metaphors. Still, he cleared his throat and addressed the group. "I'm not here to give you a certificate," he said simply. "You'll leave this place with grease under your nails, and if I do my job right, a better set of hands than when you walked in." He paused, eyeing each face. "I don't care where you came from. I don't care what your grades were. What I care about is whether you're willing to learn and to fail and to get back under the hood anyway." In the back, near the old Snap-on cabinet, stood Toby. He wasn't wearing his usual smirk. Instead, his arms were folded, and he looked like he was trying not to shrink into the shadows. Ray had been surprised when Carla told him Toby wanted to join the class. "He didn't ask," she'd said. "He just came in early one morning and started reorganizing the socket wrenches. Then he muttered something about starting over." Ray had given her a slow nod. If he's serious, he'll show up. Now, here he was, standing awkwardly among students half his age. Carla had left him off the attendance sheet, said he didn't need one. Pride was a heavy thing to swallow, and Toby had brought a double portion. But Ray understood what it took to come back when your ego was bruised and the world had already decided who you were. He'd done it himself. That first week, Ray focused on the basics: compression testing, diagnostic protocols, engine teardown, and rebuild theory. He spoke slowly, without flair, never raising his voice. Instead of pointing out mistakes, he asked questions. "Why do you think it failed? What's your next move? Would you trust this on the open road?" Students learned to answer not with words, but with hands. Slowly, the hum of impact wrenches and the clink of sockets found a rhythm. By the end of the second week, they weren't just students, they were a team. One evening, as dusk settled over Garland, Ray lingered behind while the rest of the crew packed up. Carla leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching as Ray knelt beside the oil-stained floor with a mop and a bucket. "You know," she said, her voice soft with a smile, "you don't have to do that anymore." Ray didn't look up. He made a careful pass along a streak of grease. "I know," he replied, "but every day should end with something clean." She tilted her head. "That a habit from your army days?" Ray chuckled under his breath. "That's a habit from surviving them." That night, Ethan stayed late, double-checking wiring on a rusted '87 Silverado the students were restoring as a group project. He glanced over at Ray, who was finishing the floor, and asked, "Did you ever think you'd be doing this at your age?" Ray paused, leaning on the mop handle. "Not once," he admitted, "but somehow this feels more important than anything I ever did for Lockheed." Ethan grinned. "More important than jet engines?" Ray smiled back. "Jet engines never shook my hand and said thank you." The weeks that followed brought even more students. News spread fast in towns like Garland. High school dropouts, veterans, single moms, and kids who just couldn't sit still in a classroom showed up at the garage asking to learn. Carla rearranged the schedule, added benches, brought in extra lighting. She even cut her own hours working on cars just to help Ray teach. And Toby, awkward, defensive Toby, was changing too. He no longer barked out opinions or mocked anyone's mistakes. He listened. He stayed late to help clean tools. He even apologized to Ethan once, out of nowhere, after watching him recalibrate a torque wrench with near-perfect precision. "You're better than I was at your age," he said, voice low. "Don't waste it." One Friday afternoon, Carla called for a break and handed out sandwiches. The team sat in the sun, backs against tires, grease on their hands, and hope in their eyes. Ray stood nearby, sipping from his thermos. "Why did you really come back?" Carla asked, just loud enough for him to hear. Ray stared out across the dusty lot, eyes tracing the silhouette of the shop against the horizon. "Because for the first time in a long time," he said quietly, "I'm not fixing broken machines. I'm helping build something that works." She nodded slowly. "And what's that?" Ray turned to her, eyes bright with quiet conviction. "People." And as twilight settled once more on the town of Garland, the sound of sockets clicking and engines turning over echoed into the night. Familiar, honest music in a garage where skill had become its own language, and every pair of hands told a story. The first time Harold Finch called again, Ray didn't answer. He saw the name flash on the screen of the dusty old landline phone in the kitchen and let it ring out, the sharp chime echoing through the empty farmhouse. Outside, the winter wheat bent in the breeze, and the sun was just starting to set over Garland. He knew why Harold was calling. The second time, Ray picked up. "Raymond," Harold said, voice warm, familiar. "We've finalized the proposal. I'd like you to come out to Austin next week. The board unanimously approved you as honorary director. You'd have your own wing at the center, full autonomy. You wouldn't be tied down to anything unless you wanted to be. There was a long pause on the line. Ray stood by the window, fingers wrapped around his coffee mug. The silence said more than words could. "Harold," he finally replied, his voice gravelly but kind. "That's mighty generous of you, but I'm afraid I have to decline." Harold hesitated. "Are you sure?" "This is a rare opportunity." Ray smiled softly, eyes drifting to the horizon. "Yeah, I've had a few rare opportunities in my life, but I've only had one real home, and I just found it again." Back at the garage, things were changing fast. The first semester of Whitmore and Jensen Mechanics Academy was nearing its end. Carla had cleared out half the service bays and converted them into teaching stalls. A chalkboard leaned against one wall, grease-streaked, but still legible. Ethan had taken on a part-time teaching role, and even Toby, once the most cynical of the bunch, now ran afternoon demos on transmission systems for local teens. On a chilly Tuesday morning, Carla burst into Ray's workspace with a letter in her hand and a look on her face that blended pride and joy. "You might want to sit down," she said. Ray raised an eyebrow, wiping his hands on a rag. "Did we finally run out of coffee filters?" She grinned and handed him the envelope. It was from the National Technical Scholarship Foundation. The logo alone was enough to send a jolt through Ray's chest. He opened it slowly, read silently, then blinked hard behind his glasses. Full Scholarship Award, Ethan Morales. Ray's fingers tightened slightly around the letter. Carla said nothing, letting the moment settle. "I didn't think," Ray started, but his throat caught. "He earned it," Carla said. "But it wouldn't have happened without you. That scholarship fund, you didn't just build it, Ray. You made it real." Ray didn't speak. Instead, he reached for the nearest stool and sat down slowly, the letter still trembling in his hand. Later that day, Carla called the whole team into the garage's break room. There, sitting on the table between an old coffee pot and a stack of shop manuals, was a small wooden box. "This is for you," she told Ray. He looked at her, puzzled. "Unless it's got socket wrenches in there, I don't think I need anything else." "Just open it." He flipped the latch and opened the lid. Inside were dozens, maybe hundreds, of folded letters, notes, and cards. Some were handwritten in pencil, others typed out on old computers. All of them were thank you letters from students, past and present, who had passed through his course. Some were simple. "Thank you, Mr. Ray. I learned how to fix my dad's truck." Others were more heartfelt. "Before this class, I thought I wasn't smart enough. You made me believe I was." One from Toby read, "Thanks for not giving up on a stubborn fool like me." Ray sat down again, slower this time, as if the weight of the box had added years to his shoulders and lifted others from them. He didn't cry, but his voice was hoarse when he whispered, "I don't deserve all this." Carla knelt beside him. "Maybe not, but you gave us your time, your mind, your hands, and your story. That box is just proof that you changed lives, Ray." He gently ran his hand across the letters as if they were precious metal. That evening, when everyone had left and the lights were dimmed, Ray did what he always did. He picked up the mop and began to clean the garage floor. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because even after everything, Lockheed Martin, war zones, courtrooms, applause and rejection, there was peace in sweeping away the day's dust. He whistled a soft tune as he worked, the fluorescent light above humming in rhythm. Outside, the stars began to appear one by one, quiet and unassuming, like all good things that take time to shine. And Ray Whitmore, the man who once walked away from the world, chose once more, deliberately, humbly, to stay. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the garage, casting golden shafts of light over grease-stained floors and rows of worn toolboxes. It was the first warm day after a long, stubborn spring. Outside, folding chairs had been set up beneath a canvas banner that read, "Whitmore and Jensen Mechanics Academy, first graduating class." There were 27 names on the roll sheet, 27 young men and women, farm kids, dropout welders, sons of ranch hands, daughters of truckers, who had walked through these garage doors months ago with nothing but calloused hands and a dream. Ray stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing his usual denim shirt and old work boots, nervously rubbing the palm of one hand with the thumb of the other. He had been through war zones, corporate boardrooms, and government hearings. But this made his heart race in ways he couldn't quite name. Carla took the mic first. Her voice was strong, clear. "A year ago, this garage was just a place to fix axles and change oil," she said. "Today, it's a school, a family, a future, and we owe that to one man who never asked for a spotlight, but who lit the way for all of us." Ray glanced down, pretending to adjust his belt, hiding the welling in his eyes. The crowd applauded as Carla motioned him forward. He stepped up slowly, as if each foot carried a lifetime of weight. When he reached the front, Ethan was waiting with a microphone and a soft smile. The young man looked sharper now, confident posture, oil-free overalls, hands no longer shaking when they held a wrench. Ray gently patted his shoulder before facing the crowd. He looked out at the sea of expectant faces. "I'm not good with speeches," Ray began, his voice low but steady. "I've spent most of my life behind machines, not microphones." A light chuckle rose from the crowd. "But there's something I've learned that I want to leave with you today," he continued. "Mechanics. It's not about knowing more than the guy next to you. It's about sharing what you know. It's about lifting someone else's hood and saying, 'Let's figure this out together.'" He paused, letting the silence settle. A breeze rustled the edges of the banner above him. "Tools wear down, machines break. But what we pass on, that stays. That's the legacy." There wasn't a dry eye in the front row. Even Carla, tough as bolts, blinked more than usual. Ray reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished key, the original key to the front door of the garage, the one that used to stick if you didn't jiggle it just right. He turned to Ethan. "This place doesn't belong to me," he said softly. "It belongs to the ones who show up early, stay late, and never stop learning. Today, that's you." Ethan's hand trembled slightly as Ray dropped the key into his palm. The crowd erupted in applause. Some whistled. A few shouted his name. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding, a lump forming in his throat too big to speak past. After the ceremony, music played from a dusty speaker in the corner. Someone had baked a sheet cake with a wrench and a gear drawn in blue icing. Families took pictures. Graduates hugged their mentors. Carla and Ethan posed for one in front of the sign, both beaming. Ray quietly slipped away. He walked to the back of the garage where the old workbench stood. His bench. It was cleaner now, reorganized with labels and polish, but still held the spirit of 1,000 tiny fixes. A worn rag lay folded near the corner. He picked it up, knelt down, and started wiping a streak of oil from the floor. It wasn't necessary. Someone else would have done it, but there was comfort in the rhythm, in the scent of machinery and motor oil. As he worked, the sounds of laughter and celebration behind him grew distant, like echoes of a life finally in harmony. And for the first time in years, he smiled. Not the tired smile of a man resigned to fate, but the quiet smile of someone who had given everything he had and found in return something deeper than purpose. He found home. And so the story of the old man in Garland, who once bet on a broken engine, ended not with noise or fireworks, but with a gentle wipe, a full heart, and a legacy humming like a well-tuned machine. If you've made it this far, then maybe, just maybe, something about Ray Whitmore's story stayed with you. Maybe it was the quiet courage of a man who chose to fix things no one else would. Or maybe it was the way he built a legacy not with headlines or fortune, but with grease-stained hands, quiet mornings, and a willingness to listen. Ray didn't ask for a second chance. He didn't chase recognition. But he showed us all what it means to be truly seen. Not for titles or accolades, but for what you do when no one's watching. For the way you show up, again and again, even when the world has stopped asking. So here's my question for you, watching this from wherever you are. Who's your Ray? Who's that one person who quietly made things better in your life? Was it a teacher who stayed late? A parent who gave everything they had? A neighbor who helped fix your car and never asked for anything in return? Tell us about them right here in the comments. And if you've ever felt like Ray, overlooked, underestimated, maybe even forgotten, know this. It's never too late to pick up your wrench, to teach someone, to pass on what you know, to remind the world that some of its strongest foundations were built by people it never thought to thank. This channel isn't just about stories like Ray's. It's about all the quiet heroes, the farmers, the builders, the fixers, the single parents, the dreamers who keep going, not because anyone's watching, but because something inside them won't quit. If you felt something real in Ray's journey, hit that subscribe button, because we've got more stories coming that you won't want to miss. Stories about redemption, about grit, about ordinary people who changed the world in ways the world almost didn't notice. Leave us a comment. Let us know what Ray's story meant to you. And while you're at it, go thank the Ray in your life. Call them, message them, remind them that what they gave mattered. Because sometimes the loudest impact comes from the quietest people. And here, on this channel, we're listening. Subscribe, comment, share the story, and we'll see you in the next story.